Welcome to Timeless Tales, History, and Folklore. I'm Dayanara, your host. If you're intrigued by tales, history, and folklore, subscribe and press the notification bell so that you'll be notified each time I upload a new video. Today I'll be talking about the Wolfman, or the better known term, the werewolf. Werewolf legends are one of the oldest tales of human monsters in recorded history. A werewolf in European folklore is a man who turns into a wolf at night. He devours animals, corpses, or people, but returns to human form by day. Some werewolves shapeshift at will. Others, in whom the condition is hereditary or acquired by having been bitten by a werewolf, change shape involuntarily under the influence of the full moon. If wounded in wolf form, the wounds will show in human form and may lead to its detection. Belief in these creatures is found throughout the world. It is unknown where the legend of the werewolf originated from, but many scholars believe that they first appeared in the epic tale of Gilgamesh. The tale of Gilgamesh, a god king, the fifth king of the first dynasty, who reigned around 2600 BC. In the story, Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, love, war, and sex, is in love with Gilgamesh, so she flirts with him. Gilgamesh rejects her because of her poor treatment to her past suitors. One suitor, a young shepherd, had fallen in love with her. He left her a bountiful of offerings at a shrine on a mountainside, and initially she encouraged him. Eventually, she grew bored with his devotions and transformed him into a wolf. He was then torn to pieces by his very own hounds. This being the reason why Gilgamesh rejected her. The story of the shepherd is the first known written account of a man being transformed into a wolf. There is uncertainty that he was actually a werewolf, therefore many dispute the idea that this is where the legend originated from. Werewolves made another early appearance in Greek mythology with the legend of Lycaon. Lycaon was the son of Pelasgus and Deianira. He enraged the god Zeus when he served him a meal made from the remains of a sacrificed boy. As punishment, Zeus turned Lycaon and his sons into wolves. Werewolves also emerged in early Nordic folklore in the saga of the Volsungs. It's the story of a father and son who find wolf pelts that had the power to turn people into wolves for 10 days. The father and son wore the pelts, transformed into wolves, and went into a killing rampage. The rampage ended when the father attacked his son, causing a lethal wound. The son managed to survive because a kind raven gave the father a leaf with healing powers. Many so-called werewolves from centuries ago were in fact serial killers. In France, 1521, there were two Frenchmen, Pierre Vergot and Michel Verda, who swore an allegiance with the devil and claimed to have an ointment that turned them into wolves. After confessing to murdering several children, they were both burned at the stake, one of the few ways thought to kill a werewolf. The Werewolf of Dole, a 16th century Frenchman by the name of Gilles Garnier, claimed to fame, was also an ointment with wolf morphing abilities. According to this legend, as a wolf, he viciously killed children and ate them. He too was burned at the stake for his horrific crimes. There is debate as to whether Verda or Garnier were mentally ill, acting under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs. Either way, Europeans at this time were superstitious, and such heinous crimes could only be committed by a horrific beast such as a werewolf. It was inconceivable that any human being would commit such an unspeakable act. In Bedburg, Germany, Peter Stoob, a wealthy 5th century farmer, is the most notorious werewolf of them all. According to folklore, he turned into a wolf-like creature at night, devouring many citizens of Bedburg. Peter was blamed for the gruesome killings after being cornered by hunters who claimed they saw him shapeshift from werewolf to human form. He experienced a grisly execution after having confessed under torture to killing animals, men, women, and children, eating their remains. He declared that he owned an enchanted belt that gave him the power to transform into a werewolf at will. Not surprisingly, the belt was never found, giving rise to the question as to whether he was actually a werewolf. Torture was an acceptable strategy to get people to confess to crimes that they may or may not have committed. The traumatic physical and psychological implications of tormenting someone could cause the innocent to confess to something they didn't do just to be relieved of the torture. Peter's guilt was controversial because many people believed that he wasn't a killer, but the victim of a political witch hunt. Either way, the circumstances surrounding his life and death stoked rampant fears at the time that werewolves were on the loose. In South America, there was the lobizón, the South American werewolf. The myth of the lobizón prevails in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. It stems from the Portuguese belief that the 7th son of a family of all boys would turn into a werewolf on the night of the full moon, and especially on a Friday. The myth is especially prevalent in Argentina. The origin of the Lobizón legend is in Guarani, the indigenous people of Paraguay, whose mythology stated there were 7 monsters. Of the 7, the last one was known as the Lobizón. It had a horrendous appearance but had no resemblance to a wolf and became known as the god of death. When Europeans colonized South America, Lobizón's association with death began to wane over time. The Lobizón myth eventually mixed with Europeans' werewolf legends. The lobizón then evolved into a half-man, half-wolf beast. Finally, in North America, no other country has played a more influential role than that of the United States in creating the werewolf phenomenon, especially in 1980s movies and among horror fans. Makeup artist Rick Baker provided the most realistic werewolf transformations ever depicted on the screen, with films such as The Howling, An American Werewolf in London, and Michael Jackson's Thriller among his groundbreaking works. The legend of the werewolf in America comes from European settlers. When these pioneers began settling in North America, they noticed a considerable wolf population. When their legends mixed with Native American ones, already in existence before the European arrivals, America created the myth we see today. Other folk tales maintain that werewolves shapeshifted at will due to a curse. Many believed that they transformed with the help of an enchanted sash or a cloak made of wolf pelt. Some claim that people became wolves after having been scratched or bit by a werewolf. In most legends, a person turns into a werewolf during the presence of a full moon. According to a study conducted at Australia's Cavalry Newcastle Hospital, a full moon brings out beast in many humans. The study found that of the 91 violent acute behavior incidents at the hospital between August 2008 to July 2009, 23% happened during the full moon. I've left a link to my video, Luna Moon, in the description that briefly touches on this. Patients attacked staff and displayed wolf-like behaviors such as biting, spitting, and scratching. Although many were under the influence of drugs and alcohol, it's unclear why they became intensely violent when the moon was full. Aside from the many legends, there are a few medical explanations for the werewolf phenomenon. Peter the Wild Boy was found wandering naked in 1725 on all fours in a German forest. Many thought he was a werewolf or at least raised by wolves. Peter ate with his hands and didn't speak. Eventually, he was adopted by the courts of King George I and King George II. He lived out his days as their pet in England. Unfortunately, European monarchies often adopted and exploited people with abnormalities during this era. Research has shown that Peter likely had Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, a condition discovered in 1978 that causes lack of speech, distinct facial features, difficulty breathing, and intellectual challenges. Other medical conditions that may have encouraged werewolf mania through history are lycanthropy, a rare psychological condition that causes people to believe that they're changing into a wolf or another animal. Then we have food poisoning, hypertrichosis, a rare genetic disorder causing excessive hair growth, rabies, and hallucination caused by hallucinogenic herbs. Throughout the centuries, people have used werewolves and other mythic beasts to explain the unexplainable. Werewolves have a cult following with werewolf sightings reported every year. Werewolf legends will likely continue to haunt the dreams of people throughout the world. It's hard to understand how the legend of the werewolf began. Many who engaged in pagan and spiritual practices used totems or effigies. While the use of a totem relates to indigenous people, many ancient civilizations believe that wearing the skin of an animal, such as a wolf, will gain that animal's power. We see many examples of tribal people doing ritual dances before and during their hunts in order to empower them with the spirit of that animal. Becoming a werewolf is seen as an act of magical power. Whether you believe in them or not, they are yet another fascinating legend that continues to galvanize the imagination of writers, movie makers, and real people in the modern world. The truth is, if a werewolf behaved like a psychopath, it wouldn't be because it was part animal, but because he was still too human. only humans kill for sport. What do you think about the werewolf legend? Has modern cinema romanticized them, or are they more terrifying than ever? Your thoughts and opinions are appreciated. If you liked this video and found it interesting, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for watching.